Welcome back. Now we finally have our video where I'm going to show you how to use Cubase in surround sound. So I've got a blank project for that. Goodbye old project. And we'll be starting with a very simple surround sound project. But I also want to show you some more advanced features, and I also want to show you the control room. Now the control room is not purely a surround sound feature. It's useful for live tracking, it's useful for ADR, but it is particularly useful for surround sound mixing as well. So I'll be introducing that to you over here. And this is also where there's a bit of a difference between Cubase and Nuendo, but let's finish a few more Cubase things before we move on to Nuendo. So here's my blank project, and this is completely default. So you'll see when I open my audio connections, F4, alternatively studio audio connections, I have default stereo in and out. That's defaulted to connections on my sound card, and the control room is not enabled. So this is not quite what we want. In this simple project, I won't be using any recordings, so I'm just going to leave that as is. I can also remove the bus. And for the output, for now, I am just going to create a single surround sound 5.1 surround output bus. But on the more advanced setup, I would like to show you how to create more than one bus so that you can export both surround sound and stereo from the same project. But let's start this quite simply. So I'm going to remove that stereo bus, and I'm going to create a new one. On the wrong screen, there's our new bus, and we are doing 5.1 surround. Now you'll notice there's a lot of other surround formats, and you'll also notice that Nuendo has a whole lot more. But 5.1 or LRC or ambisonics, those are the ones that you might be using the most, and we are creating a 5.1 master bus, and I'm going to call that my SR main. Adding the bus, and you see it's defaulted to the correct ITU or SMPTE order of 5.1 surround tracks. Now you can reorder those, and then again in Nuendo it gives you a lot more channel order options, but this is exactly what you need for your standard 5.1 project. What you'll also notice later on is there's this little orange loudspeaker that shows you that this bus is your main mix. You can right click and see that this is the main mix. This comes into play when you've got more than one bus. But for now, I'm going to keep this simple. Just this output bus, no inputs. We're just mixing, we're not recording now. And we are good to move to our project. Now, similar to the other class demonstrations we did when we used the mono, stereo, and surround track, I'm going to do the same here. Now, as you know, you can right-click and create any of these audio tracks in Cubase, but you can also hit T to get this quite useful add track menu. It gives you all the different track types as long as the other standard options. So I want an audio track, don't want an input, I want a mono. And for now, it's going to go to that main surround output bus that we created. And I'm going to add that track. Let's keep the dialog open because I want to create more than one. And then I want to create stereo track. Just one for now. And I want to create my 5.1 surround track. And as you know, what would we do without some color in our lives? So I'm going to randomly assign some colors to these tracks. And for surround, let's go with that. Quite bright. So you can notice from the little icon there, mono, surround, and this one tells you 5.1. You can see what these tracks are. Our Cubase will handle the files quite nicely if you put the wrong one on the wrong track, but be quite strict in terms of how tracks and panners and plugins behave. Now, as we've covered before, you have your output here, and this is also where you can go to specific stems or group tracks if you have other buses available. But as I said, for this demo, let's keep it simple, basic tracks to basic surround output. I'll open my mixer quickly at the bottom here so that you can see already there's some specific differences between the panners available there. That should ring a bell if you've looked at a surround panner before. But let's hide the mixer for a moment and get some audio onto these tracks. Let us go for our stereo piano track as before, and let us go for our surround sound ambience. And as you will see here, my LFE track is empty. This is an ambience that I recorded with a double MS setup, and I did not extract an LFE from that, but the track is still there, even though it's empty, so that the channel count is 6 and the speakers are assigned correctly. So that's my surround track. And for a mono track, I don't have anything, so let's quickly patch my voice. So this is mono, this is my rifle mic that I'm using, and it happens to be on input 1. So if I go to mono track 1, I assign it to ME66 that I just created there, and I hit record enable. Now, if I enable the monitoring, you'll only then see the levels over here. But if I open my mixer, you'll see my input bus here, or my input track, that does give you levels. And as I showed you before, you can tailor where these show up. So let's go for our favorite test line. I am the very model of a modern major general. I've information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. There's my mono track, which you'll hear more than once now. But let's just check if playback works. I am the very model of a modern major general. I've information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. That'll do for a mono track. And just so that you know what else we have, here's the piano track. Side note, this is going to be on YouTube, and YouTube does not support more than stereo. So I have done a bit of patching with my sound card to have the left, right, center, and left and right surround all go onto the same stereo track with various amounts of trim here so that nothing overloads. So yes, you'll hear left and right, but no, you won't be hearing anything behind you. Here's our piano. And lastly, here is our surround ambience.
Oh, fuck you too.
So I'll be using those basic tracks there. And the point of this video is to show you the panner, but we will definitely be going into some advanced features in terms of how to do effects and how to have a dedicated LFE track and stuff like that. But let's start with the simple things. Let's solo our mono track over here, and I'm going to have a loop there just in case, and I'm going to open its panner. Now you could either go on the track here to quick note to fader, then you see the panner there, and you can double click to open that track panner, or you can go to your mixer and then your panner's there. You can use this panner, but if you double click again, it opens the panner. Or thirdly, and that's the one I usually use, I have a dedicated spot on my second screen for this edit channel settings window, which has everything built in. And you will notice there's the panner on top of the track. So again, I want to double click to open that. Now this is a combination for me of some of the panners that you've seen before. It's got kind of that block grid view, except you've got a whole lot more controls here. And these controls are also not limited to standard surround here. When you've got a top view, you actually get to zoom further out when you're doing ambisonics and object-based audio. But for today, we're going to stick to the same block here. And you have your 5.1 surround speaker. So if you do standard panning, I am the very model of a modern major general. I've information, vegetable. You can see very smooth standard LCR panning in front, unlike Reaper. And again, have a look at your meters because you won't hear behind you how it behaves when I pan in the front, but also behind me. I am the very model of a modern major general. I've information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I am the very model of a modern major general. And that's our rear center. See how it behaves if I put it right in the middle of the sound field? I am the very model of a modern major general. I've information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I am the very model of a modern major general. I've information, vegetable. Pretty standard stuff there. Right in the middle, you actually have bias towards your center speaker and your surrounds, which is also something we've seen before. You have to command click on the controls to reset them. I am the very model, and then it's nice and front and center. So just panning with this puck, that's pretty standard stuff and don't really need to be explained, but you also have these specific controls here if you want a very specific motion. Now this is for use with a mouse. So I've got the freehand standard positioning mode here. If you hold in shift, you get a fine positioning mode. I am the very model of a modern major general. I've information, vegetable, animal. And you can see from my mouse movements, it follows the same movement, but it's a much finer resolution if you want to do very precise, fine panning. And you can guess what these other modes are going to do based on the arrows. If I'm in vertical mode, no matter where I move the mouse horizontally, it's just going to pan front to back, horizontally or diagonally, which you want to be able to do in certain cases. So play around with those if you are using this. Now again, I'm going to command click on all these controls. That's the easiest way to reset that. So let's look at some of the other features you have here. X, Y, Z. Now X is your horizontal axis. And as before, it's standard knobs here. You drag up and down, unlike the ones we've seen the other day. And then Y, that is front to back. So let's just be somewhere over there to pan front and back, and again command click to reset to the front. And then Z's not going to be a thing here, it's grayed out because Z is your height. It is the third dimension, and that only comes into play if you have height channels like in Dolby Atmos or some other object-based or ambisonics formats. So we'll revisit that when we look at ambisonics, but for now you only use X and Y, which is front, back, left, right. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of these controls, but let's have a look at some of this. Divergence is a typical name to call this. You've seen different names for this feature, but I like the divergence offered in Cubase Innuendo because it specifies front, rear, and height, rather than just a single control. Have a look what happens. If I open up the divergence in the front, it spreads out to adjacent channels in the front. So now it's just the front center speaker. The very model. And the more you bleed this in, it's going to be center and front, left, right. I am the very model of a modern major general. So that's the front divergence. And look, you have to be panned away from the front to be able to use front and rear divergence. If you have it just in the front here and you add the rear. I am the very model of a modern major. It doesn't actually add anything to the rear channels, but say we're in the middle here. Have a look at what happens now. Front divergence. I am the very model of a and rear divergence. I am the very model of a modern major. It affects adjacent channels there. So play around with these divergence controls. It's really a better thing to hear what it does rather than trying to look at meters on a screen like this. So the other control I want to show you here is the center distribution control. Now that name might be a little bit confusing. I want you to think of that as something similar to the center level in something like Reaper. Now, again, the picture looks a lot like divergence, even though it's on the borderline here. But look at what happens to the meters. This is actually the control that dips the center channel, that attenuates it. So the more center distribution you have, the more the signal will rather just come out over front, left, and right instead of center. Different to divergence, where it spreads out to those adjacent channels. So this is normal center, the very model, and this is fully distributed. The very model, which is a phantom center. And if you have it somewhere in between, let's look at what 50% looks like. The very model of the, you can see the pan law in play there, where the center speaker is a certain number of decibels higher than left and right. But if you combine those, they'll probably end up being the same thing. So play around with this. Be careful for not having a decorrelated signal. But if you want that voice-over effect where you have the voice coming out from more than just the center speaker, this would be a very easy way to control that, but you can achieve something similar with divergence. Where I've used center distribution would be where I build certain stereo pairs of signals where I only want to use my front left and right and my rear left and right, and I don't want it to come out of the center speaker, or I mostly don't want it to come out of that center speaker. What you can do with these speaker indications is you can mute or solo. So you can see the colors suggest what's happening. I am the very model of a modern major general. I've now selected all of them, so that's a bit useless. I am the very model, major general. I've information vegetable. So the red ones are soloed, the yellow ones are not. I am the very model of a modern major. So you could achieve something similar by just muting the center channel, but if you want to do it a little bit more refined by having mostly muted, mostly attenuated, then you can use the center distribution channel. And look, this is the standard Steinberg multi-panner, which is a great panner. When we look at Nuendo, I'll also show you another third-party panner that is included for free with Nuendo, which is something called AnyMix, which has a few other nice features. But that is our panner on a mono track with a single puck. And as I said, the easiest way just to reset things to where they were to start with is to command click on all your controls that you may have changed. Last thing I want to show you here, as with other DAWs, you can bleed off a certain amount of your signal to your LFE track, which is in a sense similar to bass management. Now have a look at your fourth channel here on the output. At the moment it's just 3 center. I'm the very model of a, and if I bleed in a lot of LFE, I'm the very model of a mod. You can see now it's duplicating that onto your LFE, which I would not advise. Remember, with the mixing we are doing, you have a dedicated LFE track and you are not doing any kind of bass management on the mix level. So that is our mono panner.